This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. When is a plant considered a weed? Experts at Penn State University have a simple answer. When its undesirable qualities outweigh its good qualities. Consider the fact that crops generally produce several hundred seeds from each plant. But each weed plant can produce tens or even hundreds of thousands of seeds. And some buried seeds can survive up to 40 years or even longer. Eradicating weeds means that you have to remove all the seeds and roots so the plants will not grow back. But birds or the wind can reintroduce them to the land. A more common way to deal with weeds is to control them enough so that the land can be used for planting. Experts advise using 2 or more control methods to deal with weeds. Chemical weed killers or natural treatments like corn gluten can suppress weed growth. Dense planting of a crop can also act as a natural control. Bill Curran is a professor of weed science at Penn State in University Park, Pennsylvania. He says one of the most common methods for suppressing weeds is dense planting. He says a dense, competitive crop that quickly shades the soil will help suppress many weeds. The seeds need light to grow, so blocking the sun will reduce weed growth. Other controls include turning over the soil, pooling the weeds, or covering them with mulch made of shredded wood, garden waste, or other material. But even mulch has its limits. Natural resource specialists point out that weeds can be transported in mulch. This is also true of soil, grain, hay, and animals. Yet, animals like sheep or goats eat weeds, so they can provide a biological control. Insects and other organisms can also act as biological controls. Preventing this spread of weeds is an important part of weed management. Farm vehicles should be kept out of areas with weeds. If that is not possible, then clean off the equipment and your shoes when leaving. Some people burn weeds or bury them deeply or make them into mulch. Professor Curran says another way to make use of weeds is to compost them. Heat is produced in the process of making organically rich compost to improve soil. The heat will kill many, though not all, weed seeds. The same is true for seeds that pass through animals that graze on weeds. Tell us about your own fight against weeds. Share your stories at voaspecialenglish.com. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. People in a community on the Pacific Coast in Southern California awoke in March to a sea of dead fish. About 850 sailboats and powerboats come and go from the marina at King Harbor in the city of Redondo Beach. But the sardines that swam into the marina never swam out. Estimates put the number of dead fish in the millions. Reporter Pete Demetrio from KNX News Radio in Los Angeles spoke to a man who has lived in the area for 26 years. The man said the die-off was as bad as he'd ever seen, but it was cleaned up pretty quickly so there was not too much smell. He remembered that about 5 years ago, there was another serious kill-off of fish in King Harbor. It was caused by a harmful algae bloom, a so-called red tide of microscopic organisms that spread from time to time. But this time, scientists found no toxic algae in King Harbor, so it was a mystery. A scientist at the University of Southern California released findings of continuing research in his laboratory. Professor David Caron said fish collected on March 8th, the day of the kill, tested strongly positive for domoic acid in their stomach contents. Domoic acid is a powerful neurotoxin produced by one kind of microalgae. Fish, such as sardines and anchovy, can get poisoned when they eat plankton that have eaten the algae. Researchers from USC confirmed that plankton collected about 20 kilometers southwest of Redondo Beach the next day had very high levels of domoic acid. This would support a theory that the fish became poisoned in coastal waters before entering the harbor. High levels of domoic acid in the sardines may have worsened the effects of oxygen loss in the water as the fish crowded into a limited space. Or the domoic acid may help explain why they entered the marina. Professor Caron said research shows that domoic acid poisoning can cause abnormal swimming in some kinds of fish. Harmful algae blooms are a common cause of fish kills. Domoic acid can also cause neurological disorders and death in animals that eat fish poisoned with the neurotoxin. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. If you ever miss one of our programs, go to voaspecialenglish.com to find transcripts and MP3s of all of our reports. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Some trees can survive a long time without water. Think of trees that grow in the desert. But other trees may need more moisture than they can get from rainfall or from the air, from, say, coastal or mountain fog. The soil stores moisture during cooler weather, but most of that moisture is gone by the middle or end of the hottest months of the year. Trees and other plants can look thirsty. Leaves can become droopy and hang downward. They can also turn yellow. Yellowing can be a sign of too much water, but it can also be a warning sign of too little water. The Vacaville Tree Foundation is a volunteer community group in California. It has advice for watering newly planted trees and established trees. With a newly planted tree, the roots have not yet spread out from the root ball. The root ball can become dry faster than the dirt around it. So put water on the area of the root ball and the surrounding soil until the roots become established. Once a tree is well established, water deeply instead of often. The amount of water needed depends on the tree and the soil. Clay soils hold water for longer periods, while sandy soils hold less water. During the hottest season, a deep watering may satisfy a tree for anywhere from 10 days to 4 weeks. Part of skilled watering is knowing to stop when the soil needs a little time to absorb the water. Otherwise, the water runs off the surface and gets wasted. Ted Zwicky is a plant scientist in California with the Phytosphere Research Company and the Vacaville Tree Foundation. He says people should not water established trees at the base of the trunk. This can harm the tree. Too much water in the soil at the base of a tree can lead to the growth of fungi. If the area is too wet, harmful organisms have a better chance to invade the tree and cause disease. Mr. Zwicky says this is true especially in Mediterranean and semi-dry climates. Many trees in these climates have adapted to having a dry area near their base during the hottest season. Mr. Zwicky notes that water displaces air in the soil, but roots are aerobic. They require oxygen for the soil. He says the roots could be starving for oxygen if you keep the soil too wet and block the flow of air. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can learn English and stay informed every day from your computer or mobile device at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Grasslands need time to rest when cattle and other animals feed on them. Moving animals from one area of pasture to another can provide the time needed for new growth. This is called rotational grazing. Experts say rotational grazing is good for the land and the animals, and it can save money. This form of grazing can reduce the need for pesticide treatments by reducing the growth of weeds, and it can limit the need for chemical fertilizers by letting animal waste do the job of natural fertilizer. Rotational grazing can even help prevent wildfires by keeping grasslands in good condition. Letting animals feed continually and intensively in the same grazing areas can require costly replanting. Animals eat the most desirable growth first. When that keeps happening, the roots do not have enough time to recover. As a result, less desirable plants may replace them. Intensively used grasslands are also harmed as the soil is continually crushed under the weight of heavy animals, and the animals usually avoid their own waste, so that reduces the amount of good grazing space even more. Experts say that while rotational grazing can save money over time, it also requires planning, and that starts with a good map to mark fences, water supplies, and grazing areas. Changing methods of grazing also requires time. Farmers may want to put up electric fences to enclose grazing areas called paddocks. The paddocks will need water. Some farmers design paths for animals from different paddocks to drink from a common watering place. Farmers can start rotational grazing by removing animals from a pasture when the grass is eaten to less than 5 centimeters. The pasture is then kept empty until the grass grows to more than 15 centimeters high. Experts say sheep and goats may require special preparations. They may need stronger fences than other animals, and while they eat the grass, they may need guard animals to protect them from animals that would like to eat them. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. For transcripts, MP3s, and podcasts of our reports, visit us on the web at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find captioned videos of our reports and post comments and questions.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Food prices have risen sharply in the past few years. The good news is that the rate of increase has slowed. The bad news is that prices will not go down anytime soon. Also, the rate of global agricultural production is slowing, but it needs to increase 60% over the next 40 years to feed a growing world population. These are some of the findings in the OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook 2012-2021. The OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The FAO is the Food and Agriculture Organization, a United Nations agency. FAO Director General José Graziano da Silva spoke at a news conference in Rome last month when the report was released. Mr. da Silva said, "The world's poorest people will feel the greatest effects of higher prices." He said for millions of people living in extreme poverty, the meaning of higher food prices is clear. They might have to change their diets, often to ones with less nutritional value. In middle-income countries, people are gaining weight. They are eating fewer fruits and vegetables, and they are eating less nutritious and cheaper food. The report also shows that farmers in poorer countries will be leading efforts to feed an expected 9 billion people by 2050. The outlook predicts that farmers in Latin America, the Caribbean, and sub-Saharan Africa will drive agricultural production in the future. Angel Gurria is chief of the OECD. He says we can feed 9 billion people by 2050 without stretching things too far. But he said we have to organize ourselves better. Still, there are many problems. 1/4 of all agricultural land is damaged. Many countries face water shortages, and experts believe climate change is driving increasingly unusual weather. The report says farmers need to use more environmentally sustainable growing methods. At the same time, it says governments should end economically harmful supports and invest more in agricultural production. Mr. Gurria says rich and poor nations need to treat agriculture more like a business. That also means reducing waste. The FAO and the OECD estimate that 1/3 of world food production is lost. This is either because of poor growing and harvesting methods or because people are throwing away good food. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. I'm Mario Ritter.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. When farmers and wild animals share land, conflicts can be hard to prevent. But the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization is trying to help. The FAO and other groups are developing what they call the Human Wildlife Conflict Mitigation Toolkit. This toolkit is a collection of advice and information that farmers in southern Africa have been testing. Wild animals are considered a top problem for the physical and economic security of rural populations in Africa. FAO official Renee Chudek says the main aim is to provide low-cost methods to deal with wild animals without harming them. For example, some farmers in Kenya use donkeys to guard against lions and cheetahs. In Zambia and Mozambique, crocodiles are blamed for more deaths than any other animal. Nile crocodiles kill an estimated 300 people each year in Mozambique alone. Strong fences at watering areas can offer protection. And people should always enter the water several at a time, in groups armed with weapons like sticks and stones, axes, and spears. But the FAO also points out that crocodile attacks are less likely in places that have not been overfished. The toolkit also has ideas to control baboons. These large monkeys raid crops, and they can kill sheep and other livestock. One suggestion is to remove the center from a loaf of bread and hide a snake inside, a live one if possible. Baboons have a fear of snakes. They also have good memories. Renee Chudek at the FAO says a baboon frightened by a snake sandwich will probably not come back. Another animal with a good memory, the elephant, often raids field crops, especially maize and cassava. Mr. Chudek says the loss of a maize crop can mean the loss of a family's food supply for a year. Did you know that elephants hate chili peppers? Farmers can grind peppers, mix them with elephant waste, and form bricks. The idea is to burn these bricks around the edges of fields to keep elephants away. Farmers can also grow fields of chili peppers and sell the surplus. Another way to control elephants is with a plastic gun called the Miri Piri bomber. It fires balls that burst and release a chili solution when they hit the elephant's skin. You might also be able to stop an elephant or a hippopotamus by shining lights in their eyes. The FAO toolkit is supposed to be available online soon. People will be able to comment on the suggestions and offer their own. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Scientists have worked for 12 years to develop what they call green super rice. They say several varieties should be available to farmers about 2 years from now in parts of Asia and Africa. The green in green super rice means environmentally friendly. Researchers say it will produce at least as much grain as other rice plants, but with fewer inputs. Super means the rice is designed to better resist droughts, floods, salty water, insects, and disease. The developers of green super rice did not use genetic engineering. Instead, they mated hundreds of varieties of rice. That way, they avoided the costs as well as the problems connected with getting permission to plant genetically engineered crops. The project involves the world's largest rice collection, the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines. It also involves the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and it includes farmers in 8 countries in Asia and 8 in Africa. Modern rice plants produce 2 to 3 times more grain than was possible before the 1960s. But they also require large amounts of water, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides. In the 1960s, the International Rice Research Institute developed miracle rice for Asia. Scientists created high-yielding crops that produced bigger harvests in what became known as the Green Revolution. It prevented widespread hunger. But critics say modern rice plants require too much water and too much use of chemicals that can hurt the environment. And farmers may be too poor to buy chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Anna McClung heads a rice breeding center for the United States Agriculture Department. She says combining many different genes into one plant without genetic engineering requires a lot of plant breeding. Ms. McClung praises the researchers working on green super rice. Another rice researcher, Jan Leach at Colorado State University, says scientists can find valuable qualities hidden in the rice genome. A genome contains all of the genetic information about an organism. She says many of the qualities are present, but they are not turned on until they are in the right genetic background, or sometimes in the right environment. Researchers on the Green Super Rice Project continue to combine desirable traits into new varieties to help farmers produce more with less. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Each year, 1 million cows in Africa die from East Coast fever. The disease is spread by tick bites. Young cows are most at risk. They can die within days. Farmers and herders can lose up to half or more of their calves to East Coast fever. The disease is widespread in 11 countries, and experts say it now threatens 10 million more animals in new areas, including southern Sudan. Researchers first developed an experimental vaccine against East Coast fever 30 years ago. The vaccine works by a process called infection and treatment. The animals are infected with whole parasites and treated with antibiotics at the same time. This keeps the disease from developing. Controlling East Coast fever has meant a better life in areas that have gotten the vaccine. For example, the vaccine has been available to a group of Maasai herders in northern Tanzania for about 7 years. They used to lose 3/4 of their newborn calves each year. Now, most survive. As a result, many people have extra cattle to sell and use the money to pay for school for their children. But making the vaccine more widely available, especially in rural areas, has been difficult. Farmers have been using supplies produced in the 1990s. Recently, there was a shortage. The International Livestock Research Institute made 1 million doses at the request of African officials, but that supply is only temporary. Another problem is that the vaccine must be kept extremely cold. Now, the nonprofit group Global Alliance for Livestock Veterinary Medicines is trying to expand production and lower the cost. GalvMed spokesman Hamid Nourou says mobile phones have helped lower some barriers to distribution. He says now, with cellular technology, most of the people we reach all have cell phones, and they call the delivery agent who can come and meet them at a particular place and do the vaccination for them. The vaccine is not cheap, but Hamid Nourou says the herders get together to sell a bull and use the money to vaccinate all their animals. They understand that they are getting value for their money. A cow is worth nearly twice as much if it is vaccinated. A goal is to have local people develop businesses supplying the vaccine. The efforts are supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the British government. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Antibiotics are used to cure bacterial infections, but about 50 years ago, farmers started to give small amounts of these drugs to healthy animals in their feed. Scientists found that antibiotics improve the growth rate of animals, but the practice soon led to criticism. Public health experts observed antibiotic-resistant bacteria growing in these animals. Experts say bacteria develop resistance from continual exposure to antibiotics, and resistant bacteria can make it harder to treat infections in humans. Today, big livestock producers around the world use antibiotics for animal growth. Some countries are considering restrictions or already have them. The European Union began to enforce a ban 5 years ago, and South Korea has approved a new ban. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration first proposed to ban antibiotic use in healthy animals in 1977. Congress, however, asked for more research. Today, there is no ban. But in June of last year, the FDA asked producers to stop the practice over time. That recommendation was not enough for some critics. 5 environmental and consumer groups have asked a court to force a ban by the federal agency. Steve Roach is with the group Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT. He says, as far as we can tell, all they were trying to do was kindly ask the industry to make changes. His group wants the government to ban the use of 2 common antibiotics at levels below those used to treat sick animals. He says after 30 years, the time has come for someone to put a little more pressure on them. And that is what the aim of the lawsuit is. Supporters of low-level antibiotic use in animals say there is no solid evidence linking it to drug-resistant infections in humans. They also say that in addition to increasing growth, the drugs help suppress diseases in animals confined together in large feeding operations. Ron Phillips is with the Animal Health Institute, a trade group for the animal drug industry. He says suppressing animal disease means a safer food supply. Sicker animals result in greater contamination on the meat. So, the way to control pathogens on the farm so that they do not transfer through the food chain is to make sure we have healthy farm animals. Experts say the largest source of resistant bacteria is the overuse and misuse of antibiotics among people. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Aquaponics is the idea of producing vegetables and fish in the same closed system. It combines aquaculture, or fish farming, with hydroponics, a way to grow plants without soil. Supporters see aquaponics as a way to increase world food supplies and reduce climate change, groundwater pollution, and overfishing. Sylvia Bernstein says the idea is as old as nature. Aquaponics is really a recirculating wetland system, so it's happening right on the banks of our lakes. She grew plants in water with a chemical fertilizer for years. Then she discovered she could use wastewater from fish to grow organic vegetables and fruit. She says she couldn't believe that something as simple as fish waste could become a complete fertilizer. So I had to actually see a system that was in a friend's basement. But when I did, it changed my life. That was 3 years ago. Ms. Bernstein built her first system with her son outside her home in Boulder, Colorado. Today, she raises tilapia and trout. She feeds them once a day. Her plants, including herbs, tomatoes, peppers, grow in containers. There are no weeds in her aquaponics garden and no need to worry about watering. Ms. Bernstein started her own business called the Aquaponics Source. She has a YouTube channel, teaches aquaponics at the Denver Botanic Gardens, and recently published a book. Aquaponics farmer James Godsill says the internet is helping many aquaponic gardeners connect and learn from one another. 3 years ago, Mr. Godsill helped create an aquaponics farm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, called Sweetwater Organics. In 2010, he helped establish the Sweetwater Foundation to teach people around the world about aquaponics. He calls it a very earth-friendly food production system, which, by the way, only uses about 10% of the water normal farming does and uses no pesticides. Subra Mukherjee is with a group in Kolkata, India, that is working with the foundation to develop aquaponics in a community in West Bengal. The community has poor soil conditions for growing food. Mr. Mukherjee says technologies like aquaponics are ideal for these kinds of situations. We can actually bring it right into the middle of slums in the cities. So it becomes a very good model for urban and village-based communities. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti. Have you ever worked with aquaponics? Tell us about it. at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Not all vegetables need lots of sunshine. Mark Hoffman and his wife, Gia, own a bed and breakfast guest house in rural Kempton, Illinois. The Hoffmans have also been growing food and flowers for 25 years. For almost 10 of those years, Mr. Hoffman has been working with shade plantings. He says visitors to his website, greenhousebed.com, often ask how to plant in shade spaces. The bottom line here is that most plants will produce more in full sun. But if you do not have full sun, there are other options. For example, he grows tomatoes near oak trees. Oak trees can produce a lot of shade. But Mr. Hoffman says his tomato plants grow as long as they get 5 hours a day of direct sunshine, especially morning sun. Not only does this go against the traditional advice that tomatoes need 6, 8, even 12 hours a day of full sun, it also shows how plants and tree roots can share nutrients and water. Mr. Hoffman also planted asparagus around a tree at its drip line, the area below the outer limit of the branches. Rain drips down right on the asparagus. He says the asparagus has been there for 6 years now and is doing wonderfully. The Hoffman's website includes a list of vegetables, flowers, and herbs that have produced acceptably for them in partial shade. Besides tomatoes and asparagus, these include broccoli, daylilies, horseradish, Irish potatoes, oregano, and winter onions. Mr. Hoffman says plants with wider leaves seem to do better in shady environments. He also found that his potatoes did better in partial shade than in full sun. Moving them out of the sun helped control an insect problem with leaf hoppers. Mr. Hoffman does not use pesticides. Instead, he planted the potatoes at the drip line, especially on the east side of the tree. The potatoes get morning sun, but they are shaded during the hottest part of the day. Leaf hoppers dislike shade, and the hottest part of the day is when they do the worst of their damage. Time of day, brightness of the sun, shadows from trees, walls, and buildings. These all influence how much sunlight falls or does not fall on plants. And Extension Agent Curtis Swift at Colorado State University says people interested in shade planting should also remember something else. The term shade can describe different amounts of darkness. He says it can even mean different things in different parts of the world. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.